A memorial service was held today for Mr. Othman Wok, one of Singapore's first-generation leaders and a champion of its multicultural society. The former Cabinet Minister was laid to rest yesterday. Dylan Low filed this report from the Victoria Concert Hall, where the service was held earlier this evening.
A somber and solemn atmosphere over here at the Victoria Concert Hall, where guests, more than 600 of them from all walks of life, including from the social services sector, the civil service, as well as political leaders, arrive early ahead of time to be able to pay tribute to one of the pioneer leaders of Singapore, Mr. Othman Wok. During the service, there were images of Mr. Othman from various parts of his life played out in front of the audience, followed by eulogies from leaders such as Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, as well as Minister in charge of Muslim Affairs Dr. Yaacob Ibrahim, and members of Parliament like Dr. Janil Puthucheary and Mr. Patrick Tay. Now, security arrangements were tight for this service. Roads have been closed off all afternoon, and security personnel have been positioned all over the venue to make sure that proceedings at this place proceed on without a hitch. After the eulogies delivered by the various speakers, there was a moment of silence observed in honour of Mr. Othman, and as well the national anthem Majulah Singapura was played. Majulah Singapura, of course in English, is Onward Singapore, perhaps a fitting ideal to pay tribute to Mr. Othman and the ideals that he stood for in terms of enshrining multiracialism as a tenet of Singapore society.
Now, at the memorial service, the first eulogy was delivered by Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. He spoke about Mr. Othman Wok's pivotal role in fighting for and building a multiracial Singapore.
The late Mr. Othman Wok's life was remembered in vivid detail as Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong paid tribute to his legacy, acknowledging the key role Mr. Othman played in creating the multiracial and multi-religious Singapore as we know it.
But one golden thread that ran through his long life was his commitment to the ideal of a multiracial and multi-religious Singapore. Had he not been firm in that commitment, had he hesitated or wavered in the dark days of our merger with Malaya and then separation, when our history hung in the balance, the Singapore story would have turned out differently.
Mr. Lee recounted how Mr. Othman was a stabilizing figure among the Malay community, especially during the 1963 general election, which saw PAP candidates go up against the pro-communist Barisan Socialist and UMNO from Malaya. The election marked the start of Singapore's 2 years in Malaysia, marred by racial tension and even riots. Singaporean Malay leaders were under pressure from Kuala Lumpur to abandon a multiracial society in favour of ethnic politics.
Othman and his Malay comrades stood firm and held a sufficient portion of the Singapore Malay ground. It is because they kept the dream of a multiracial society alive through those terrible dark days that we are now able to say, we the citizens of Singapore, regardless of race, language and religion.
Mr. Othman Wok would continue to play a central role when Singapore separated from Malaysia. Mr. Lee recalled how Mr. Othman signed the separation agreement without hesitation.
And that was a crucial decision. Singapore Malays would overnight cease being part of the majority race and become a minority community again. If Singapore Malays had not accepted that change, we could not have built a multiracial society. But it was because Malay Singaporeans and Malay PAP leaders in 1965 embraced the nobler dream of a shared identity, regardless of race, language, or religion, that we are able today to practice in Singapore a form of non-communal politics based on justice and equality that is unique in our region and rare in the world.
The late Mr. Othman Wok continued to make his mark post-independence. He would continue as Minister for Social Affairs until 1977 and was actively involved in the building of the National Stadium. He also helped develop the administration of Muslim Law Act, which would set the stage for MUI's Sharia court and the registry of Muslim marriages.
A pioneer leader of the Malay community. Well, that's how Minister in charge of Muslim Affairs Yaacob Ibrahim described the late Othman Wok at his memorial service. In his eulogy, Dr. Yaacob said that Mr. Othman's enduring legacy was how he managed to balance his roles as both a national leader and a leader of his community. He pointed out how Mr. Othman's introduction of the Administration of Muslim Law Act allowed Singapore Muslims to fulfill their religious obligations in a secular state. Dr. Yaacob said Mr. Othman strove to unite the country in everything he did, be it through sports, culture or Muslim affairs. He also noted that Mr. Othman's ethos of multiracialism is more important than ever, now that extreme ideologies are being promoted on many fronts.
We have a modern Singapore and a progressive Muslim community today, but it does not take much to unravel this. We must never allow this to happen. Encik Osman may have left us, but we must always remember that he has left his legacy about what this nation, our Singapore, stands for: courage, conviction, and a deep-seated commitment to the ideal of multiracialism. The Singapore spirit shines brightly today because of this, and we are a stronger and a more united people.
And Chairman of OnePeople.sg, Dr. Janil Puthucheary, said that the late Mr. Othman Wok championed the cause of multiracialism, and his approach to building a shared space built on compromise and sacrifice had influenced OnePeople.sg, an organization that promotes racial and religious harmony.
The approach to racial and social harmony taken by the pioneer generation of leaders in independent Singapore was quite unlike anything that had been attempted in history. They did not take the path of least resistance, where the dominant majority's interests trumped all else. They did not follow a path of idealism and symbolism, pretending that race was not an important factor. Instead, they chose an untried, difficult, challenging approach to recognize the differences and to work to overcome them painstakingly, repeatedly, with an eye to intervening proactively wherever possible.
Mr. Abbas Abu Amin, a former MP who took over Mr. Othman Wok's Pasir Panjang ward, said that Mr. Othman's kindness and warmth endeared him to his residents. In his eulogy, he also spoke about how Mr. Othman was always willing to help out.
Saya juga mengenang Encik Osman sebagai seorang yang tidak boleh duduk diam. Beliau bertugas dengan pasukan pertahanan rakyat ketika saya bertugas sebagai pegawai Brigade Infantry di Kamp Beecroft. Pada tahun 66, walaupun beliau seorang menteri, beliau secara sukarela mengambil bahagian dalam perbarisan Hari Kebangsaan bersama-sama dengan pegawai PDF yang lain.
The late Othman Wok was not only one of Singapore's early political stalwarts, he also played an important role as a unionist in pre-independent Singapore. In his eulogy, Assistant Secretary-General of NTUC Patrick Tay spoke about Mr. Othman's contributions to the labour movement.
Encik Othman firmly believed in the power of unions, the fact that workers would have the right to determine their own working conditions. His fellow unionists felt that he would fight for them as a representative and leader. They elected him as Honorary Secretary of the Singapore Printing Employees Union in 1951. He did not disappoint and served with distinction and pride. In 1953, he represented Malaya Publishing House, workers in a wage dispute. He fought hard and won them better terms.
And as one of Singapore's founding fathers, Mr. Othman Wok always put the country first and his family second. But he still made sure he imparted the right values to his children. His son-in-law, Munir Shah, shared this in his eulogy.
In a magazine article, he once said, and let me quote, "Although I had very little time to talk to the children, there were some values that were important for them to have. In addition to religious studies at home, we sent them all to the Convent of the Holy Infant Jesus, CHIJ, for formal schooling. I taught them never to be stuck up, especially later when I became Minister of Social Affairs. This humility, selfless attitude, and the trust in the institutions built for this nation are key attributes for which he will be remembered by all of us.